session sort of gives updates over the journey of the connectivity work that NCCI has been engaged in over the past 6 years. This started at Melghat, the CILS that was happening there. And over the course of that journey, we've also joined the Coalition for Wildlife Corridors with more boots on the ground, more people in different corridors across the nation. And so this session was now morphed into an update across the corridors for the Coalition for Wildlife Corridors, with NCCI's engagement in it as well. I'm going to first hand over to Pranav. We're going to do a series of updates so the wider community knows what we've been up to since you last heard from us. You would have remembered last CILS that there was a little bit of a chatter about Bagchal and the campaign that we were running, so there'll be some of that update and how it fits in with all the work that's already happening at the coalition. And after that, we're going to have a connected Baithak this evening that will take points from this discussion that didn't get enough time for discussion to the Baithak, specifically to do with multi-species connectivity, so not just single species focus. And the second thing is to do more local priorities around Pench, in the connectivity around Pench. मैं ये वाला बहुत टेक्निकल सेशन हिंदी में नहीं कर पाऊँगी, तो कुछ अगर स्लाइड्स पे देखना है तो उनके कुछ हिंदी ट्रांसलेशंस हैं हमारे पास, कुछ मराठी ट्रांसलेशंस भी हैं ऑफ द मटेरियल जो ये DIY किट बनता है कनेक्टिविटी के बारे में, कि कैसे एनिमल्स एक प्रोटेक्टेड एरिया से दूसरे प्रोटेक्टेड एरिया जा सकते हैं, उस बारे में उस विषय के बारे में बात करेंगे. ओके, आई एम गोना हैंड टू प्रणव फर्स्ट एंड देन आई विल गो एंड देन वील गेट बैक टू द ग्रुप विद अदर्स एज वेल.
So, as Amrita said, today is just to step you through what the coalition's been up to, but importantly to share some learnings. And I think this fora, better than any other, is great to share these learnings because I think this network is among the first, if not the first in India, to try and sort of bring people together around landscapes and landscape issues. Obviously, corridors are the heart of landscape conservation. Next, please. So I think this map drives home a message like no other, right? Just look at India on this map and take a minute to soak it in, a few seconds. So the point really is that we are at an unprecedented time in the Earth's history, all right? Never has a place in the planet's history been as crowded. Never have there been as many pressures on land, on resources, and on natural systems, obviously. Next, please. So it's not hard to imagine that India then is besieged, or its natural systems are besieged at many levels. This is just a map of change in human footprint, and you see how extensive it is across large parts of central India and other parts of India. Next, please. And that's a map, a connectivity map for a group of species, in this case, large carnivores. And again, globally, you see India sort of standing out as a country where connectivity is severely impaired or impacted by, next please. Taken these figures from a fora that Professor De Vries and others had set up. They have a website called India Under Construction that put together amazing information on sort of landscape change in India. And obviously, at the heart of it is fragmented ecosystems. The road network in India, we know, is about the fastest growing of any developing country, almost any country in the world today, for that matter. Canals, railway lines, power lines, urbanization, you name it. And then we heard from Swapan earlier today, and he spoke about, broadly about climate change impacts early on. So obviously, our landscapes are also being impacted in ways that we don't even fully understand or barely understand. That we need to be attentive to as well. Next, please. So as far as the coalition goes, the idea was born, I seeded it maybe, 6-7 years ago, and it's been nurtured by Dr. Prachi Thatte. She's not here. She's been a core part of CILS for the last couple of years, and really a leader in connectivity conservation in India. And a whole group of people at CILS, including NCCI, they've just been so supportive of this and so involved. Very grateful for that. But it's grown now to about 14 or 15 organizations whose logos appear here. And it's certainly open to membership from just about any individual or organization that would like, that sort of wants to be a part of this movement. Next, please. So, I don't need to emphasize need anymore. But if people ask me what's the single most sort of urgent conservation issue in India, I'd often say it's habitat fragmentation and land use change, because there's a whole lot of other things that you can potentially address through one means or the other. But once land is transformed, or river systems or aquatic systems are transformed from one sort of use to another and so on, reversing such transformations is prohibitively expensive and often not possible politically, socially, economically, and so on. And obviously we got a sense of the magnitude of the issue and so on. We're also recognizing that there are very significant knowledge gaps. For everything that we know about corridors, the fact that there have been so many conversations about them, that they have become a core issue in conservation in India, there's still a lot of basics that are unknown, that we're grappling with, including, for example, how many corridors there are, their shape, their extent, their dimensions, their use by species and people and so on. And then the recognition that, given the scale and scope of this problem, even for organizations like the one I come from, WWF India, we've been working on landscape conservation for, almost 3 decades now. But we still feel like we're only scratching the surface. And when we address issues like, fragmentation and land use change and connectivity, we quickly recognize that this needs durable partnerships. It needs, partnerships for science, partnerships for advocacy and policy, partnerships for with government and with a variety of stakeholders across the board. Because on our own, for any of us, we only get so far. Next, please. So. How did this coalition come about? And I think it holds important lessons. This one's for connectivity narrowly, but really I think we're at a moment where conservation in India needs partnerships. Regardless of what you're doing, what the issues are, we just have to start forming a range of partnerships across issues, across organizations and institutions and entities. And I think what worked here was this is really quite open. It's not limited to institutions. If you're an individual who wants to contribute, you can come in. We began with 9, and we've slowly been growing. Next, please. So this is a map that we've put together that sort of shows the locations of corridors in India. And at some levels, it's revealing, but in many others, I think this information is very incomplete. Because if you look at the diversity of species that need to get from one place to another to meet life history needs, to disperse, to move between habitats, to respond to environmental events, to search for food, to search for mates, and so on, these corridors are probably biased, as you might guess, towards largely towards megafauna, towards tigers and elephants and species that have been in the conservation spotlight for the longest time. But as we start recognizing that other species, smaller animals that we don't think about, many of us don't think about in our everyday lives, for that matter, aquatic species, plants, that they're also impacted by fragmentation in many ways, we recognize how inadequate a map like this is. And when you zoom into any of these stars on the map, we recognize that our understanding of corridors, of their use by a variety of species, is also very poor for the most part. And the other thing that makes corridor conservation complex, very complex, is the fact that these are not areas that lie squarely within forests, within PAs and so on. They encompass diverse land use types, many different jurisdictions. And so, so trying to sort of effect conservation or to bring sort of stakeholders and partners together is exceedingly complex. Next, please. So, with the coalition, I think, one of the most important lessons, and this is an image from 2013, several people in the room in this photo, it was taken in Pachmadi. And I think what's interesting about it is there's certainly representatives from the Coalition for Wildlife Corridors, but in this picture there are also PWD engineers, there's NHAI representatives, there are people from the irrigation department, from rural development, from so a variety of government agencies who are not traditional stakeholders in conservation at all. And really, for the coalition to really sort of advance its mission, the way forward is building alliances, building partnerships. So at least sitting around a table with actors who don't traditionally think about conservation or these issues. Next, please. And the other way in which we've sort of very systematically been trying to advance the cause of connectivity conservation is by developing products like these corridor profiles. So corridors are not glamorous spaces. They're not Pench and Kana. They're not places that will attract tourists. They're often degraded secondary forests. There could be miles and miles of cotton fields or sugarcane fields or land use types that you wouldn't take a second look at. But when you start looking at them closely, they really hold the key to the persistence and survival and future of wildlife and natural ecosystems in India. And through a narrow lens, I'd say wildlife, but more broadly, we now recognize that functional ecosystems require connectivity and landscape integrity to be maintained. So these profiles, there's a website that you can access them on, and they basically lay out, and Amrita will detail this process a little bit more. Next, please. I'm also going to preface this. There'll be more content on this coming up from Amrita and Sanket. But one of our key challenges has been just figuring out where the boundaries of a corridor lie. And as you might guess, this is a very contentious issue. It's vexed, it's contentious, and it's political. Because any kind of conservation zonation in India has consequences, obviously. It has consequences from a conservation standpoint, but consequences for the many people who use, live in, or have ambitions or aspirations for these spaces. So we've come up with a criteria to delineate corridors, and there'll be a conversation about this that Sanket will lead in a few minutes. Next, please. This is also a broader part of delineating corridors, and the fact that the coalition now, ultimately to be effective, we have to work with the government. Because one of India's biggest challenges is we don't have a comprehensive land use policy, right, for areas like corridors and so on. So decisions about delineation are fraught, but they need the government's buy-in, endorsement, and support. Envision a future for wildlife in these shared and rapidly transforming landscapes is quite simply huge. Next. Just another activity that I think has been quite meaningful that is still ongoing. This was led by Dr. Divya Vasudev and others who are not with us in the room today. But essentially every tiger reserve in India is required to develop a tiger conservation plan, which then dictates how that reserve goes about managing that space for wildlife. And as a part of that plan, they also need to develop a corridor conservation plan, essentially. We've also undertaken an exercise to evaluate how rigorous and good those plans are, and to give some feedback to the government on how these plans can be strengthened. Next, please. There's also learnings about what makes coalitions tick, at least from our limited experience from running this coalition for a few years. And the first lesson, and I think that they're worth sharing because maybe there's interest in this room on engaging with us, on working collaboratively and so on. It took us a year or more to get this going because we thought we'd have a formal MOU and bring organizations on board and so on. And that just went nowhere. It went in circles. And then, Dr. Gary Tabor, he works with the Large Landscape Connectivity Group and heads the connectivity work at IUCN. And he's a great person to form coalitions and partnerships and so on. And he came along and said, do away with all the complexity, have a simple charter, make it as light and easy as you can. And that worked wonders. I mean, in the course of one meeting, we had a bunch of organizations sign up, and it's been fairly smooth since then. The other thing, obviously, is leading and steering these coalitions, and key lessons are no one organization can dominate. You really have to make it democratic, collaborative, but it needs strong leadership. It needs leadership within institutions. It needs the backing of, it needs leadership outside of institutions. We've only gone as far as we have because in Maharashtra and in Madhya Pradesh, in particular, the Forest Department has stepped up to meet us halfway or more than halfway. to recognize that the work that we're doing adds value to their sort of ambitions, and to really pull us in and give us a window of opportunity to work with them on issues that matter. And then obviously leveraging the power of coalitions, we thought initially that it'd be easier to raise funds as a group rather than knocking on doors individually and so on. That still needs to be tested, and we've struggled to do that. But luckily, some of us had raised some seed money initially, and that's tided us over. And then various organizations have picked up and sort of pulled their weight. So again, just emphasizing the importance of being light, not making things complex, and sort of reducing transaction costs of collaboration. The more you have sort of formalized meetings and schedules and so on and so forth, the more onerous it becomes for an act of, for a collaboration that is essentially voluntary in nature. And then just to say, of course, in a talk like this, it might sound like this is a wonderful, thriving initiative. The fact is that growth has been slow. I think we've made tangible progress, but we've endured because there's, I think, a level of trust that's now been built up between partners, including that there may be durations of time when energy flags or when there's less momentum, but we still regroup and come together and sort of persevere on. So I think patience has been really important. And then, when we got started, we said one of the most important functions as a coalition is going to be to try and sort of bring out these one-voice statements for issues that matter. So if we hear of a road being developed in a certain corridor, we sort of rally together and we put out a statement and so on. The fact is 4 years have passed and we've not succeeded in doing that because there are organizational imperatives, sensitivities, a range of issues. But we are finding ways of navigating that as well and making it possible for one or more coalition partners to band together and do this, or at least be supportive of such initiatives as and when they sort of come about. Next, please. So this is something that I just sort of cobbled together, but it just shows you sort of the aspiration of where we want to be vis-a-vis where we are now. But really, at some levels, I'd say the coalition aspires to do two things. To begin with, we really want to embed and strengthen science for connectivity conservation, and to sort of produce outputs that are accessible, that are meaningful, and that can be that are actionable. So tomorrow, if there's a road coming up, if we have a coalition, the coalition's developed a corridor profile that delineates a certain corridor, and our emphasis is on ecological connectivity. These are much broader than the corridors that you'd see in other documents and so on. We are giving, and this is often developed with government agencies, we are hopefully providing the material that's needed to sort of fight it out, so to speak, when need arises, when there are pressures on these areas and so on. And the other part, of course, is from the word go, to start having some bearing on policy and decision making. Next, please. And so, towards the latter, it's how do we start engaging with development actors and agencies for them to really mainstream connectivity planning and so on. And we've just, I think, started making small inroads. There have been important lessons learned, and I think between Sanket and Amrita, we'll have an opportunity to explore this a bit more. Also, we can take it up in the Baithak afterwards. Next, please. But the long-term goal really is for a landscape like Central India, can we, in a matter of a few years, once the documentation has been done, once these corridors have been delineated, the profiles exist, we've had a number of sittings and sessions with stakeholders and so on, can we then start moving towards the recognition of these areas as ecological corridors, and then developing plans around these that have sanctity, not just in the forest department, but across a range of government agencies, bodies, and stakeholders. And so far I haven't spoken to the fact that Central India in particular and many other corridors are actually home to residents, indigenous communities and others, and who have diverse uses and needs from these corridors. And our approach, if anything, is really to enable such people to become stewards of corridors through the law. For example, by leveraging the Forest Rights Act where it's relevant, or by enhancing agricultural practices in ways that are aligned with our goals and with broader sustainability goals. Next, please. So this paper that came out a few years ago is really a touchstone and brings home a lot of what I'm talking about. Look at central India on the map on the right. Right, so, and that's really an aggregation of important habitats for a range of species, ecosystem services, and biodiversity. And you see how central India is where it's all at many levels. For central India to sort of retain its importance and character, it needs to be a connected landscape. The more fragmented it gets, the more all of those values and services diminish. And I think the opportunity here is, if you look at threat in central India, on a relative scale, because there's so much more forest cover, for example, because human densities are lower, there are certain opportunities that need to be explored and that we can certainly harness. Next, please. And this is my last slide. So this basically looks at extractive sort of use and industrialization in areas that are occupied by indigenous communities, in Asia in this case. And the red dots are where there's conflict between indigenous groups and basically development of various kinds. And you see boom, central India again just jumps out. So the fact that, there's no moving forward without developing models that are inclusive, that are participatory. And I think the coalition is positioned to do that on various levels, not as a coalition, but if with constituent organizations having comprehensive programs that span, on the one hand, biodiversity conservation, on the other, participatory approaches to conservation, community-based conservation, but also really harnessing and leveraging support from the development sector, development organizations, and others to try and sort of collectively build out a vision for this landscape. Next, please. So that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Pranav. Just in the interest of time, and since we're all a bit tired after a long day, there are questions for all of us who've been part of the coalition, and there's multiple of you in the audience as well. So if you would like to find us at the Betak, that would be the best place. And I'm going to move us more into sort of what we've been doing and pick up from what Pranav's been saying. So some of the things that Pranav's been saying, I'm just going to make them more concrete. The corridor profiles take a huge amount of effort. Multiple people sit and write. And one of the things that I'm going to focus on is the pieces of work that I've seen work and where we might go with this. And then I'll hand over to Sanket, who will give us an update on how we're doing with delineation as a priority at the coalition. So one of the things that we're really kicked about is the fact that there are comprehensive corridor profiles. And like Pranav said, the only way this was real was because a bunch of us decided we're going to go away for 3 days and write them. There wasn't any formalized workshop between 17 or all of us across things. It was just like, do you have 3 days? Let's go to Pachmadi, let's write these things. So that's how a lot of this work has happened, and that's how it seems to work. Like, keep it low stakes, get people in the room who are interested, and get going. Next one. And just talking about sort of the products that have come out of this work, this was coming off of the scientific consensus study for tiger corridors in central India. That was an NCCI-led study where multiple of the co-authors are in the audience. But this has now become part of the work that we do with the coalition. We've taken a SciComms campaign that comes from the consensus study and taken all those products to the workshops that we do at CWC with all the different line departments in the corridors with territorial forests. So it's sort of making sure that this information is not just available. We are going to keep on top of what the science needs to plug in terms of knowledge gaps, but we are also going to try and make it as accessible to the multiple people we want to work with. Next one. So this is the entire effort that I was just saying. Find the gap, we're continuing to do the study, but then also we have to make sure that we can use these products, pilot test them, co-create them so that the ownership is not just within people in this room, but also people who actively manage these spaces. Next. This is the study. We can go ahead. All of this is also on our website, so you can totally find all of this information there. Next one. And Pranav sort of went over this, but this is sort of the same layers for central India, showing that there is a ton of development and a ton of overlap in corridors. This is a very peopled landscape as well, as you all know. So it's sort of like, these are not, does this development serve all of the people in these corridors as well, is a question that I am super interested in. And so I'm just going to give you some cliff notes here. We don't have to go into it. All of this work spreads across networks. The NCCI is doing some piece of it. The CWC is doing some piece of it. SLTP is doing another piece of it. And it's sort of in this network of networks sandwich where all of this work can translate to the various people who have capacity on the ground to take these products and go to different departments, go to different meetings. And the collective can have different names, but it's really all of us in the same rooms with a few more additions depending on geographic or thematic differences. Go next. Yeah, there is also this really recognition that while we like to do science, and has been apparent throughout this CILS, there are so many more people who bring science alive, whether it's Rohan with his cartoons, whether it's illustrators, whether it's people who are making these beautiful maps of the places where we work. So part of the campaign or getting this information out to people is also not just these are important because they have a lot of biodiversity, it's because these are important because we care for these places. And we are also part of the community in these corridors that we love and work with. So that's one thing. And one important point from here is that we did try and do one piece of this as co-created with the Forest Department. And that's the information card, which is the very local level single corridor territorial divisions between two protected areas. So how do you do that with the territorial department staff so that the product itself is co-owned by the managers as we build out the science? Go next. So this is, of course, the high-res poster of sort of like the information from Bagchal. And this is on the website as well. You can download it. And it's been used in multiple ways. Predominantly, people have thought of it as using it as a gift to get the conversation going, especially with people who don't do connectivity conservation. So that's sort of like one use case of this SciComs idea. You can go next. This is more the infographic, and a lot of work went into this. This is sort of taking a very dry scientific paper, which we all put our hearts into. It's dry for people to read it now, but one of the things is, it does need these details, and part of what made this infographic interesting was that when we put in all the details, we also realized WCT had a bunch of information on how to use standard engineering setups in mitigation measures. So then it was like, oh, we have some information that could directly go to people saying, oh, all of this is really troublesome, there's a lot of development, does it work for corridors, it doesn't work for wildlife, but also some solutions. Also some solutions of if you use these standard engineering blocks in certain ways, you could make mitigation measures easier. So there's also that idea of moving towards solutions. Next. And of course, we made them in vernacular so that more people can use them. The idea is coming off of what Pranav was saying in terms of the TCPs, that's Tiger Conservation Plans. Those plans right now largely end up being a regurgitation of the guidelines as plans. So in the future, what we would really like, and what we've tried to broker at the CWC, is using all of these scientific inputs and these scientific sort of SciComs outputs in workshops to make sure there is an on-ground committee that can work to help make TCPs better. So the next time the TCPs start getting formed, it's very likely the government will reach out with the people they already know on site, which will be part of CWC, which will have all of this information to plug into those plans. Next. And this is the one that we co-created with the Forest Department. This was all on Zoom, but it was very well received at the last CWC workshop where the other line departments were called in. And in fact, on day 2, the Forest Department themselves said, please show all the SciComs outputs you guys have made, because that's what will be the stuff we send on WhatsApp to these guys when it's time for us to work together on something. We're not going to send them the paper, we're not going to send them the stats, but this is what we will send them. Just next. Yeah, this is also across the 3 languages we could do. And I really think of Bagchal as a process tool where the corridor profiles are more like the docket of all the information. So I see the SciComs outputs as ways to engage different stakeholders and potentially make more things together. this is the starting point to get them engaged with that. So I see this more as taking it to a workshop and saying, would you like to make an info card? Does this poster work for you? Is this video a video you would send on WhatsApp to someone who was doing an EIA? Those are the kind of interactions that really interest me and have received a lot of they've been received well. And finally, one big outcome from the last workshop, and this is just an update for the larger community here, which is the kind of work that we've been doing systematically, looking at the science, looking at reviewing the TCPs, then working with everyone to see what support you need on the ground. It's resulted in enough trust for the line departments to say, there are a bunch of EIA professionals we work with. Would there be interest in doing curriculums for capacity training and things like that, which I think is a huge opportunity to take the science into where it really matters and really push it into places where there's no longer a space to say we didn't know this place was important or we didn't know what mitigation was possible. So I think that's a really good outcome from a body of work that has many details that we can't get into here. I'd love to play the Bagchal videos. If you are interested, we could watch those. And then I can hand it over to Sanket after that. But should we do the videos first?
पृथ्वी पर सभी जीवों के लिए कुछ मौलिक है, भोजन के लिए, काम के लिए और कभी-कभी एक नया घर खोजने के लिए। एक जगह से दूसरी जगह जाने की आवश्यकता। कुछ सफर अपने स्वभाव से ही मानव निर्मित सीमाओं से परे होते हैं। भारत के दिल की गहराइयों में, जहां जंगल, नदियां और लोग एक साथ रहते हैं, वहां राष्ट्रीय पशु बाघ का भी निवास है। पृथ्वी पे सबसे बड़ी जंगली बाघों की आबादी इसी मध्य भारत के विशाल क्षेत्र में पाई जाती है। पीढ़ियों से लोगों ने इसी भूमि को बाघ के साथ साझा किया है। आज बाघों की संख्या बढ़ रही है, लेकिन इस कहानी में संख्या के अलावा और भी बहुत कुछ है। वैज्ञानिकों का मानना है कि बाघों की आबादी को और पनपने के लिए आनुवंशिक सामग्री का आदान प्रदान की आवश्यकता है, जो तभी संभव है जब बाघ एक जगह से दूसरी जगह जा सके। वास्तविकता में भारत के 35% बाघ का क्षेत्र संरक्षित क्षेत्रों के बाहर आता है। जीवन के इस संबंध को वैज्ञानिक कनेक्टिविटी कहते हैं। हाल ही में जिस तरह से इन क्षेत्रों में परिवर्तन हुए हैं, कनेक्टिविटी खतरे में है, जो अक्सर लोगों और बाघों के लिए त्रासदियों का कारण बनती है। इन सबके बीच कहीं ना कहीं हमने एक महत्वपूर्ण संबंध खो दिया है। वन्य जीवन के क्षेत्रों को जोड़ने के लिए इंसानों को एकजुट होना पड़ेगा। क्या हम ऐसे तरीके खोज सकते हैं जो इन यात्राओं में एक के बदले दूसरे को विशेष अधिकार नहीं देते? भारत के इस दिल में कुछ महत्वपूर्ण सामने आ रहा है, जो खो रहा है उसे फिर से जोड़ने का प्रयास।
It's very valuable. It certainly showed me how valuable it is to take science and make it more accessible. But yeah, over to you, Sanket, for another really important update, which is sort of core to what we do as a coalition.
Thanks, Amrita, for this opportunity to be Akhri speaker for the day. So, हाँ, और बैठक के लिए भी मुझे इंटरेस्ट जनरेट करना है, तो पता नहीं मैं ये सब कैसे करूँगा इतना बोरिंग टॉपिक को लेके। बट मेरा नाम संकेत है, मैं WWF के लिए काम करता हूँ, मैं भोपाल बेस्ड हूँ, और मैं ट्रेंड इकोलॉजिस्ट नहीं हूँ, बट मैं भी इतना समझता हूँ कि ये कॉरिडोर्स 3 किलोमीटर की स्ट्रेट लाइनें नहीं हैं। तो यही सवाल मैं पूछते रहता हूँ लोगों को, तो क्या है कॉरिडोर और इसको कैसे डिफाइन करें, क्योंकि यही सवाल मुझे आते हैं जब हम कंसल्टेंट्स के पास जाते हैं। वो बोलते हैं अच्छा मिटिगेशन स्ट्रक्चर बनाना है, बताओ कहाँ पे मिटिगेशन स्ट्रक्चर बनाना है। इसीलिए ये लाइनें मैप पे होना ज़रूरी है, ये कागज़ दिखाना ज़रूरी है हमें। इसीलिए इवन इफ़ सारे साइंटिस्ट ये रूम में के बोले कि ये काम नहीं करेगा, हमें करना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि डिलीनिएशन करना ज़रूरी है। इन कंसल्टेंट्स के टूवर्ड्स हम बहुत सारे पेपर्स, साइंटिफिक पेपर्स फेंक नहीं सकते। We need to give them very clear boundaries saying कि this is what our latest understanding of corridors is, और इसको हम अपडेट भी कर सकते हैं। आज अभिनव बात करेगा कि इसमें मल्टी स्पीसीज़ का कैसे, आज हम लोग मेगाफाउना को देख रहे हैं, इसको कॉरिडोर्स को डिफाइन करते वक्त इसको मल्टी स्पीसीज़ में कैसे कन्वर्ट किया जाए, तो इस पर भी बैठक में बात होगी। हमारा अभी चैलेंज ये है इसमें कि अगर आप देख सकते हो इसमें से बहुत सारे कनेक्टिविटी एरियाज़ है जो बहुत कन्वीनियंट कॉरिडोर्स नहीं है। बहुत जगह पे बहुत ब्रॉड सारे के सारे एरिया को कनेक्टिविटी एरिया कॉरिडोर लिया गया है, एंड मेन पर्सपेक्टिव हमको जो आया है ऑफिशियल से कि ये नेगोशिएबल पोजीशन नहीं है हमारे लिए भी, क्योंकि एज प्रणव वाज सेइंग इट्स वेरी पॉलिटिकल प्रोसेस. जब भी आप बोलोगे कि ये कॉरिडोर है, कम्युनिटीज़ विल आस्क क्वेश्चंस कि हमारा कंसेंट लेना ज़रूरी है. यू विल हैव क्वेश्चंस फ्रॉम डेवलपर्स और रेवेन्यू डिपार्टमेंट सेइंग कि अच्छा इसको तुमने कॉरिडोर बोल दिया है, इसका मतलब क्या है, डज दिस मीन वी कांट डू आवर एक्टिविटीज़ हियर. So from the point of view of negotiations, we have got a feedback saying कि ये बहुत broad है, हमको इसमें nested corridors की तरह कुछ बनाना पड़ेगा कि these are broader connectivity areas, but these are the most important parts of those connectivity areas which can be defined as a corridor. So it's again work in progress, but we are hopeful कि ये हम लोग एक notify करें. And most interestingly, अभी तक I think apart from जो NTCA का 2012 का document था, official document, only slightly better document we have is for the Vidarbha landscape, जो telemetry के basis के पे किया गया था. But if we really get this out for MP, this will be first time where consensus-based, scientifically determined corridors are getting notified. And most important thing is इसमें ना ही सिर्फ forest areas recognize किए जाएंगे, इसमें agricultural areas और non-forest areas भी connectivity के लिए रिकग्नाइज हो सकते हैं, विच इज़ वेरी वेरी क्रूशल. बिकॉज अगर आपने कुछ लोगों को समृद्धि हाईवे के बारे में पता है, फॉरेस्ट एरियाज में तो मिटिगेशन दे दिया है, बट लॉट ऑफ व्हाट इज हैपनिंग इन टर्म्स ऑफ रोड किल्स, accidents of even the vehicles because of the animals crossing, and connectivity loss is not through forest areas really. So if we are able to really identify these corridors, and if non-forest areas for the first time get recognition as corridors, it would be significant step in terms of getting these corridors recognized and eventually protected, of course. And another commitment we have is जो भी नए working plans या TCPs बनेंगे, उसमें यही मैप और यही डॉक्यूमेंट को रेफर किया जाएगा विद इन MP. सो दैट मीन्स वो सारे मैनेजमेंट प्लान्स में भी चला जाएगा, which means it's a fantastic opportunity for us to make impact. It's still, as I said, work in progress, but fingers crossed, inshallah, we'll get this soon. So, thanks.
Just a couple of points there. I know we have a lot of people here who also work in corridors in the sense of livelihoods and things. So just to point out that the coalition, as Pranav said, is well equipped to consider what would it mean to declare these as corridors. They would not be protected areas. They would still be multiple use. They would still have multiple management. So for the wider audience, it's important to know that that would still be our motivation to have them managed for multiple goals that these shared landscapes have. Yeah, the Jugalbandi, yeah. And apart from that, I know you might have some questions for the three of us immediately, which I think do we have time? Are we out of time? Where are we at? What's the time? So I think we'll continue. Find us at our Baithak. We're also here tomorrow. Please ask us about anything about the CWC and how to engage with it or what we're doing. I do want to say that it's not possible to tell you how many different working groups and how many different templates have been working on this. There are like at least 7 short projects within the work that you've seen today that we've all been part of across 6 months, 6 months, 6 months. So there's a ton of work that goes on there. Yeah, sure. For the next 3 minutes, any comments, any questions for the three of us, go for it. Abhinav and Ajinkya, are you in the room? Can you both stand up? This is the follow-on Baithak that will happen. That is for connectivity, specifically over multiple species and local priorities. So those questions can go there.
I'll keep my question in Hindi because many of them understand Hindi. So मेरा प्रश्न ये है, आज रोहन जब अपना टॉक दे रहे थे तो ही सेड कि आप इंडिया में कहीं से भी कहीं ट्रैवल करेंगे, आपको यहाँ से होके जाना पड़ेगा और उसके लिए लीनियर इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर बहुत ज़रूरी है. तो these corridors, what we are calling them corridors, are under severe threat. And so मेरा प्रश्न यहाँ पे ये है कि when we put static maps, हम जो static corridor यहाँ पे बता रहे हैं, उससे वो solution नहीं निकल पाएगा because we are not thinking about dynamic nature of corridors. I mean, there have been studies that we are involved in जहाँ पे corridors को आप इस तरह से static नहीं बना सकते ना. I'm afraid that अगर आप 10 साल के action plan में static corridor देते हैं और एक हाईवे वहाँ पे वाइडन हो जाता है या एक और लीनियर इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर आ जाता है तो कॉरिडोर चेंज हो जाएगा. That's my first question. And my second observation is that let's not call it corridor map because it's largely for tigers. And if we are considering multi-species, then things would change completely. So if we are giving, अगर हम मध्य प्रदेश वन विभाग को कुछ देना चाहते हैं, तो या तो हम इसको टाइगर कॉरिडोर मैप बोलें, या फिर हमारे पास एक टेम्पलेट हो जो सारी स्पीशीज के लिए हो. तो that's my observation. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll just quickly respond, and maybe Sanket might want to respond to that as well. जो आपका पहला प्रश्न था, आई थिंक मेरा व्यू थोड़ा अलग है उसमें. मेरा व्यू ये है कि हम कोई भी मैप दें, डायनेमिक हो, स्टैटिक हो, अगर हमारे वो रिलेशनशिप्स नहीं बनेंगे तो वो मैप का कोई काम नहीं है. तो अगर अभी स्टैटिक मैप ही बन सकता है और उसके बल पे वो रिलेशनशिप्स को हम स्ट्रेंथन कर सकते हैं, फिर आगे जब डायनेमिक मैप की तरक्की हो पाएगी, वी कैन गेट देयर. मगर अगर अभी मेरे को डर ये है कि वो 10 साल के में कोई भी मैप नहीं होगा तो वो 3 किलोमीटर वाली लाइन जाएगी बस. एंड वो विन फियर, मेरा रिस्पॉन्स है समथिंग बेटर देन नथिंग. बट आई टेक योर पॉइंट एंड आई फील लाइक मेरा ओवर आर्चिंग व्यू है कि द रिलेशनशिप्स विल हैव टू होल्ड गुड as everyone progresses, whether it's the forest department or us or the EIA consultants. Like, that's the ecosystem we have to work in. That we should. That we should absolutely make sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, Amrita, you have already answered it. And yeah, for me, that's also the question, because as I said, unless there is a paper in hand which says that this is corridor, you're not going to go to a developers and say that, build a mitigation structure here. Because are we okay to just let go some of these areas just because all of us couldn't agree on one line on the map? And as Amrita said, unless we do this, there's still that single line of 3 kilometers which is going to be considered as a corridor. So yeah, it's maybe 30% progress, but hopefully it's a progress.
One very quick interjection. The fact, if you look at these also, it's a sizable area of the state of Madhya Pradesh. So in a sense, even if these are not quote unquote dynamic corridors, we're pushing for a very broad encompassing definition. And in that, there are safeguards built in to I think, encompass some of the dynamism, even if we're not doing it explicitly. So I think, they should suffice. And we're really pushing for a broader, more comprehensive delineation.